All right, guys, welcome back. Welcome back to the Opinionated Collective. Got a special treat this week. Last week, Justin and I basically walked you through post-secondary college education and, unfortunately, the challenges of today's job market, which, by the way, we're in a recession globally, and I'm pretty sure this is prevalent in Canada right now, correct?
Yes, that's right. It's kind of unstable.
So the collective today would like to welcome back our wonderful friend to the podcast and somebody who's really special to our podcast, Miss Elizabeth.
Hi, good to be back. Thank you, Ben.
All right,
Justin.
So today we're going to discuss a very unfortunately hot button topic. And this one is not just popular on social media. This one's unfortunately triggers everybody in this topic particularly triggers a lot of anger on all sides, whether it's work or basic living. Today, we're going to be discussing the myth of the gender pay gap. Is it real or is it a myth? And this one, unfortunately, when you scroll through social media like LinkedIn or you listen to the mainstream media itself, this issue is continually just beaten to death, and not always for good reasons. So let's give a little background on this. I couldn't pull up my Medium article, but I'm basically going to sum up my Medium article for everyone today. There's two pay disparities that both need discussing. Women and autism. Which one as a group do the three of us believe is more discussed? Which one needs to be more discussed? So Elizabeth, I'll start with you. Which one do you think is beaten to death? Which do you think needs to be discussed more?
I do think autism, yes, that could be more focused on, and pay gap, because that's something that's never talked about actually, on social media or anywhere. It's always focused on women and the pay gap, but not other groups, So I think, yes, that could be, a discussion could be started on that, definitely.
I brought with me today three things. I'm going to sum up my Medium article, and then I did a little research during the week, and I found two articles. One was done by Pew Research Center. The other was done by Forbes. They both get into, let's just say, a heavy amount of statistics. I'll let everyone here and the audience decide if they think this is more favoring to women or more favoring toward men, or it's just being what we consider moderate. And then I'll sum up my article, which basically was actually more favorable to autism. So we'll define a little bit about both. From my article, within the last 20 years from now, which is 2022, and I might even go back to the 1980s, potentially, women's wages have seen a rise. So I'm going to go over some women's occupations and I'm going to go over some men's occupations, because in Canada, this was hugely debated by a lot of raging feminists and Dr. Jordan Peterson, who many women, whether you respect the man or not, don't like him because he argues with facts, while they just want to argue rhetoric. And I'm pretty sure we know in America, this argument is on steroids. In your country, I don't think there can be a tolerant discussion about it, can there?
No. I mean, Canada is a feminist country now.
I forgot, Didn't your prime minister call himself a feminist?
Yes, he did. In fact, that was his only stance. When I heard that, I thought, okay, but what else? What else are you going to focus on? So, yeah, he made it pretty clear.
Yeah, and but unfortunately, your country doesn't like him for other reasons, but that's another podcast. That's another podcast if I ever choose to do what we call United States or Canada election theme.
Oh, yes, but we have to be careful, right? In that department.
I don't think I care at this point. Now, do I? Okay, so I'm going to sum up. What we're going to do for the first two articles is I'm going to take a little from Forbes and a little from Pew. But here's where I'm going to start first. We're going to start with popular women's occupations. Tell the audience. So if everybody remembers, Elizabeth right now is studying a social work program with the idea to become a community habilitation worker, where she advocates for men and the use of more men's programs, which has become a problem in Canada. But it's also a big problem here in the United States as well, because every program that I could think of is unfortunately geared toward women.
Here too. Yeah, definitely.
That's why I said I think there's a comparative purposes with them. So we're going to start with women's occupations. The most popular women's occupations, starting with the first, is registered nurse. And by the way, for anyone who wants to know, I'm in the medical field, and we have women doctors where the argument with feminism is women are underpaid from the feminist perspective in regards to men in terms of salaries. Here's the thing from somebody who works in the medical field. While I may find myself agreeing that they're underpaid, women doctors still make significantly more than nurses. However, nurses, unfortunately, when they achieve RN or LPN or even nurse practitioner, are actually seeing increases in salaries, especially with the fact that a registered nurse will now get picked out to actually be a department manager in this case, or where I work, this is what we call a patient care manager, where basically she'll run a specialty or two, 3 to 4. Now, among medical practices, most of the women doctors, if they go back for another degree, will eventually be able to sit on the board. But normally those positions are kind of divvied up between what we call a master's degree or a master's of public administration, which is for a business person. And then a medical doctor will normally be in the president's role, potentially the chairman, or last but not least, the CEO or the chief medical officer. Now, with the popular women's occupation after registered nurse, I would say would be social work, because traditionally, I believe you would probably agree with me, even growing up, did you encounter when you were in school more male social workers or female social workers, to both of you?
More female.
Justin,
Yeah.
how about you?
More female.
Well, I actually worked at a nonprofit when I was actually had the title of social worker.
Okay.
But I
Oh,
wasn't really a social worker. I was pretty much a bona fide data entry person. But
how women
all
dominated was
right,
that nonprofit?
let's say just about everyone that in that role was a woman.
So see, predominantly. Yeah, that is
Pretty
true.
much. However, in my case, because I knew something beyond, and actually I was hired specifically for tech, really, but they had to get me in somewhere, some kind of way. I was relied more along the IT front, and then when I laterally transferred, that's where I went.
Were you seeing more women starting to come into like the IT roles? Because traditionally, IT is actually considered a men's occupation.
Traditionally, yes, IT was considered a male occupation. However, I know in the software engineering field, you actually have an interesting split between, say, developers and engineers versus testers and quality assurance.
What about analysts? Because analysts seem to be now even keel between men and women.
Analyst, I'm not so sure as I don't interact with analysts all that much, but I usually am interacting with other developers, software engineers, or quality assurance and testers. And predominantly the quality assurance and testers are predominantly women as compared to developers and software engineers, which are predominantly your men. Yes, there are crossovers. It has happened, but that's usually the dynamic. And so, because of that dynamic, you usually see that quality assurance personnel and testers get paid less than the developers and the software engineers do. That is
Now,
typical. But
now
for some
on
reason, the women tend to gravitate toward quality assurance and testers. And directly from someone that I've worked with prior, the reason why she didn't want to be a developer is confidence. So that's where that went.
So I'm going to cherry off of that. I'm going to cherry pick off of that point and say I just switched roles so everyone's well aware, but in the field that I work in, which is the medical field, especially among what we call back office. So the people that make the appointments, which are schedulers, secretaries, patient services assistants, front desk. In this type of working experience for the last year, I've been working at a medical group. So everyone in my department, there's a ratio of men, but it's small in comparison to LBGT and women, which isn't a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. I do enjoy, working with a bit of everyone. But the one thing is, from being a patient services assistant hired as an operator, unfortunately, I recently just learned one female was actually making a couple dollars more than me because she had a master's degree versus my 16 years of practical, reasonable retail and, intern experience along the lines of customer service, where I probably should have been getting what she got. But unfortunately, the difference between her and I was literally one extra degree and about 2 more years in the medical field. So, and she was a medical scribe. So I don't blame her because she figured out how to argue for what she really wanted, but they had her settled down at $3 more than what I was making, which goes to this whole LinkedIn argument on salary, but that's another one, so tying to this, which is the gender pay gap, although I don't know how you two would feel specifically since you know me, but instead of me complaining about it, what I did was I learned, I may have been mad about it at first, but I ended up talking with her and we figured out a way for me to get a few dollars more into a new role because I've been in the practice for about a year. But unfortunately, would you argue in my case that it was because, it's a woman-dominated department, or the fact that, there's a small percentage of men, along with the fact that I'm on the autism spectrum and they probably could use that over me with training? Or do you think it was just based on experience and aptitude?
Well, I would like to jump in on this one. First of all, the truth is never going to be known because there's so many factors that went into this. However, I will say this. Despite the years of experience that you have, and despite being on the scale, you could have, let's just say the gap shouldn't be really anything because you effectively, from a customer service standpoint, have the skills, have the knowledge, have the ability, but they want the degree.
And I understand.
That's what it's about.
I understand they want the degree. I don't kill them for that. But The thing you run into is this, whether man or woman. The degree doesn't always justify the fact that somebody who's worked in retail for a very long time, in my case and many others' case, because one of my colleagues in there has been in a doctor's office for up to 20 years, is probably making a lot more than me, and she's a woman. But she's been in the doctor's office for an incredibly long time with her. I don't know if she has a degree or not, but I would say in that case, the more time you've spent in a doctor's office, potentially, you know much more than the college degree.
Yeah, I agree there. It's a combination. I think I also agree with what Justin said too. It's a couple of things, right? So how long you've been in the job, what skills you have, the credentials you have. So, it's beyond the gender issue, which is what a lot of the those who argue about this pay gap, they just focus on that. But clearly in your case, your female colleague, she had that extra thing in her favor, which was the master's. And I find a lot of jobs, they like that, right? They like when you have the degree or that extra something that will push you further, So I agree there, like with Justin, when he said you have the skills, that's what they should really focus on. I mean, in addition to some credentials, but you're doing your job pretty well. And it comes down to negotiation too, I think, because again, like you said, she knew what to say. She knew her worth, right? So that's another part of
One
it too.
thing I'm gonna say from the millennial perspective, Justin and I, there's two articles that I wrote for Medium. One of them was Millennials Y1 and Millennials Y2. Justin and I are part of Millennials Y1. As he and I have gone back and forth and both agreed on this, Millennials Y1 will now be seen as the most disadvantaged from a perspective of what happened globally, economically, within the last 10 years, because he and I remember like yourself know what the 2008 recession did to anyone who was coming out of college. And we discussed this in a preview. He and I discussed this last week in the education episode. We discussed this in the relationships episode with you and Aaron, but basically the three of us, will now, once we get to our parents' eventual age, we will have been one of those generations that suffered within our first 20 years, probably 2 to 3 setbacks. And two of those setbacks happened to be the 2008 recession and coronavirus, which also now is literally just triggered another recession.
Yeah.
And then we got people on LinkedIn who are whining about women being paid less. Now, the Pew Research article, as I'm going to take a quote directly from the article. As has been the case in recent decades, 2020, wage gap was smaller for workers aged 25 to 34, workers 16 and older. Women 25 to 34 earn 93 cents for every dollar a man in the same group earned on average. In 1980, women in the same age demographic earned 33 cents less, even though wages went up a little bit depending on the industry versus their male counterparts, compared with 7 cents in 2020, estimated 16-cent gender pay gap among all workers in 2020 was down from 36 cents in 1980. So from that little glimpse that I just read off, what would the two of you just say? Would you say that wages still went up within the 20 years for women, as did the fact that they're now coming from traditional occupations like social work, clerical, customer service, administrative, like I said at the top, registered nurses who are becoming department managers in medical practices and hospitals and are getting into leadership positions today? Would you say that their wages are going up, at least on some level?
Yes, definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're going up. And in fact, this whole gender pay gap in, say, real terms, I'm talking about like real terms, it's probably a lot smaller than people think. And the variances, and this is strictly my 2-cent opinion, chalk it up to random uniqueness. Like there are no two people that are alike exactly. Like you can have twins, both girls, both boys, one male, one female, does not matter. They can go to the same school, same everything, same whatever. And the pay can be slightly different depending on who
Experience,
knows
yeah, different thing.
experience. It could be the fact that um, one got some internship that was better, or maybe it's just the fact that
Personality.
personality, but not even that. Let's say they have everything service paribus, and they both interview at the same time for the same exact job at the same exact company, but there's only one position.
Yeah, what determines that, right?
What
Yeah.
determines that? And the
Most
answer is
normally it would be your
judgment call.
judgment call, but I will also say this. On LinkedIn, I just pulled up a friend that I went to college with. She happens to be a woman, and I'm not going to give out her name, but she and I went to the same college, and we took business together. We took business classes together. She was actually in a couple of my finance classes. Today, I'm going to use a men's occupation, which is mainly male dominated, but she works for a company in my area, which I'm sure is also in Florida and where you're going to be moving, North Carolina. Are either of you familiar with Mavis tires?
No.
Justin, I know you're familiar with Mavis.
You mean Mavis or Navis?
Mavis. Mavis Tire Supply LLC, where you get tires.
No.
Oh, we have Canadian Tire.
Sorry.
Well, then maybe this is just a New York company. But anyway,
maybe.
The friend
And
of mine is
South
from
Carolina, not North Carolina. You got that
South
wrong.
Carolina. Well, anyway, the friend of mine is actually from Peru and she speaks Spanish. But anyway, I'm just going to use this company, Mavis, as an example. Among the skilled trades, which are entirely more male dominated, I can't necessarily give, well, actually I could give statistics. 99% of the workforce between vehicle technicians, mechanics, electricians, carpenters, plumbers, and HVAC goes for anywhere from 98% to 99%. Women would make up 2% of the workforce. And the company she works for, which is Mavis, now she's a vice president of talent acquisition, has basically been trying to encourage women to consider coming into the skilled trades. Not that the skilled trades may not pay as much as what you're doing. You know, the salary would be consummate along the lines of, you know, just an average salary in the skilled trades. But what the skilled trades, where the skilled trades differ from everything else is the skilled trades, there'll always be a job available. And it was the argument that the media peddled up. So for example, the top thing I would say, especially with a company like Mavis, most people are always going to need an auto mechanic. It's going to come down to need to fix your car. I don't care what anybody says, but as we're going into the future, cars are almost always going to need service on some level. So therefore, that mechanic, whether they own a shop or, you know, construction projects, skilled trades are sadly always going to be needed. So there is a market for this, and it wouldn't hurt women to consider looking at those type of jobs.
And I would like to interject with this comment here. A lot of it does have to do with choice. And I think that is a big that's being overseen by this whole issue is the fact that certain genders do gravitate towards certain fields.
I agree with that. For example, yeah. Elizabeth, I would probably say you've seen this within your classes. What's the ratio of men to women in community habilitation and social service and social work?
Yeah, it is predominantly, I think my classes, now thinking about it, yeah, mainly women. There is some men, but women usually, I think they dominate the classes. Yeah.
When
And
I came
yeah,
across a Jordan Peterson video, one of the earlier ones, maybe I think, was it back in 2017 or 2018? He was debating a really annoying woman from the UK who just happened to be a feminist. And
yeah.
she said to him, I think you and I spoke about this one time. I may have shown you the video, but basically she said, why can't you get more men into occupations like nursing? And from my perspective, I remember watching movies back in the 1990s, since we all are going to be able to remember this. Do either of you remember the movie with Ben Stiller and Robert De Niro called Meet the Parents?
Yeah, I didn't see it, but I
Yes,
remember.
I do.
In the very beginning of the movie, Ben Stiller's character was basically a male nurse. In the 1990s, men were laughed at and considered to be called by society homosexuals. You know, even I don't know if I should be using that word or not, but, you know, they would typically get laughed at. Whereas a career like nursing, when you look at the fact that technology is rapidly changing every year, one thing, I'm going to use my field as an example. Right now, what field is not doing layoffs? What field is openly hiring right now, looking for talent, but knows they unfortunately won't be able to match the wages? The medical field. Especially right now with the global recession triggered. Finance, technology, manufacturing, they're laying people off left and right. You're seeing it all over sites like LinkedIn. Everyone's doing posts. Oh, I was let go from this company. Oh, I was let go from this big name company. Within the last month, Coinbase, everyone's personal favorite one, better.com, because that CEO is just, I don't even know. There are no words for that CEO at this point, and that's a finance company, but all the big name companies are laying people off. Now, in my industry, unfortunately, yeah, we can't promise the wages. Same like your, industry, which is social work, which
Social work too.
Changes.
Yeah, always hiring.
Community work, always hiring.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, these mental health and medical field, we can't compete as industries with these industries that can pay higher salaries because we have annoying educational requirements. So the next statistic I'm going to bring up, and this is from Forbes, I'm just going to pick something out. Let's see what I can come up with. Raw versus controlled pay gap. When comparing the median salary between men and women, a 2021 report from PayScale reports that earn 82 cents for every dollar men make. This 18% difference is raw gender pay gap. However, when accounting for other factors besides gender, such as in education, experience, location, industry, gender gap wage shrinks dramatically to just 2% difference. So the controlled gender pay gap means that women are making 98 cents for every dollar men make. And yet somehow, when you look at all over the media, what I just read is most likely ignored because, let's be honest, everything is rhetoric at this point, especially when you look at LinkedIn, where certain people are making this about race. And I don't think you can make this just about race. I think you make this about education and experience level. What do you two think?
Yeah.
You go first.
Yeah, that's right. It's it goes beyond race and all that. I know some people try to put that in, but no, it doesn't matter what you are. I think it just comes down to like your skills, just different factors that go beyond the obvious variables about a person, right? And I also want to add to the thing about choice. I think that's a big one, because I find too that even though like the options are out there for women, but the government and different initiatives keep pushing to say get more women in, but maybe they don't necessarily want to for some careers, So
one thing I want to add now, we did a good amount on women. I'm going to now go on to the autistic portion of this. In the Medium article, I detailed my wage progression. Back in 2004, I was making $7.15 an hour. I stayed on that wage for about 4 years. I went to two short-term jobs for about a year where I was making $8 an hour. Afterwards, at GNC, I bounced back down to $7 an hour and stayed that way until 2014. And then I was working at a nonprofit where it literally went up $1 each year. So starting July 6th, I will finally be getting out of the teen wages, going into a more appropriate 20 an hour wage. But here's the thing that I would say for autism. The biggest thing that this community needs right now aren't just government initiatives. We need, or private sector initiatives. Not all of us are suited to tech. I know this was the popular one because, tech can pay the wages. Don't get me wrong. Having tech skills is valued today. And that's what today for millennials is now going to get you the high six-figure salary or the livable salary. But I remember an article that I ran across today that might need to be just considered a little bit. It was a table. And I'm going to pull it up real briefly right now, and we're going to incorporate this in. Choosing the right job for people with autism, or what was called Asperger's back in the 1990s. So basically, there's 4 tables. Now, doesn't matter in the autism community if you're man or woman in this case, because unfortunately, I'm a different case since I'm high functioning, and I detailed it in wages. Most people on the autism spectrum are actually paid a lot less than me. And it gets bad. At a company that I used to work at, one of our disabled workers who happened to be blind was actually paid cents less, but that was because he was on Medicaid. But it gets pretty bad for people on the spectrum because, they're charging Medicaid for certain types of services. This is another episode that I'll go into, but basically, to finish off on this point, the reason most autism males and women going from table 1 really qualify for Medicaid and make low wages in the first place is because we're still thinking they should be in low pressure jobs like cashier, short order cook, waitress, or taxi driver, which pay historically bad wages to begin with anyway. At the very minimum, receptionist, which is an entry-level job for a woman, or, an autistic adult like myself, at least has a little bit of growth possibility within an organization. What would you two say back to that?
go ahead, Justin.
It's a lot to digest.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of. Yeah.
Well, the first thing I would say is that is really unfortunate because, and I think there is some sort of, I don't want to
very
say
outdated, old-fashioned outlook on what autism can do.
Yep.
Unfortunately, I'm about to describe a problem that's a uniquely United States of America problem, but let's look at our elected leadership, where the President of the United States and certain members of Congress are in their 80s. I'm not saying that I don't appreciate the leadership in this perspective, but that point in the 20th century is way too outdated to be thinking people on the spectrum should still be performing these type of jobs.
I think they need education, like employers should be educated on different groups or segments of the workforce. Like I know where I work and a lot of other places, there's a lot of initiatives in place and workshops and a lot on diversity and inclusion to help managers be more understanding of today's workforce.
For visual thinkers, this is table 2. This is where we get into what you're doing, Justin. I don't think computer programming or drafting are actually bad for someone on the spectrum. And believe it or not, I am starting to look at I am starting to, as you have suggested, looking at, some basic coding and, trying to learn some parts of analytics as well for the future. But like I said, one thing I'm going to say on this in regards to men, women, and autism is, unfortunately, I think everyone has different interests. And especially for autism, we should start applying 21st century interests and encourage them to not look at traditional jobs based on outdated ability. Because unfortunately, Indiana.edu, this is the site that I'm on. This was done in the 1990s. So we're now looking at the 20th century when I think even baby boomers right now as a generation had to do a lot of tech adoption themselves, as your generation, Elizabeth, is doing and my generation is having to continually do to stay relevant right now with, Gen X's, children who are just coming out of college right now. And these kids have the most tech advantages of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you're in online classes, but
how are those going, Justin?
But if you've been
Very
onto campus, what would you say the average age is right now of people in a computer programming degree or computer science degree? Probably young, right?
Probably somewhere in their 20s, early 20s, mid 20s. But it's interesting though, because as someone who is like, was in their 40s and got started in their 30s, late 30s in a program, which in fact I'm also switching universities, but still, the point is that the concepts are timeless. So it's not something that could not be learned by anybody. And I think that is the big secret is it's the principles are timeless. And that's why people go into this kind of stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, there's lots of alternatives out there. There's boot camps, there's certification programs, there's industry, there's private companies, there's all kinds of stuff. But focuses are different. Yet at the same time, for right now, because we live in the internet age, it's very easy for really anyone, no matter who they are, because
what gender they are,
or what gender they are, or it doesn't even matter anymore. It's just, oh, I want to learn how to code. Well, there's websites you can start for free. Even your degree program, if you want to go for a degree, micro-credential, minor, it's dizzying as to your options and sub-options. But at the end of the day, you can literally be, on Zoom calls, on Slack, and not many people need to see your face or hear your voice, and you can learn. And then go out into the field, and again, you can get a job on Zoom, Slack. So, and email. And so that's the thing about the whole tech revolution now. It's not about who you are, what you look like, how you sound.
I would say last decade, you can
write yourself into a job.
I would say last decade, the reason that the gender thing came up was also because of one large tech company and a certain programmer who wrote the famous manifesto about why women go into certain occupations. And then the three of us may all agree that was unfair to demonize the guy for it, because he hinted at some things in an internal memo that weren't completely wrong. For example, what I think the movements which were largely feminist and looking for certain type of progressive change last decade, made a mistake, was not fully understanding abilities of men and women. Women will gear towards certain jobs that they feel were appropriate to their walk of life or their experience. So for Elizabeth, for example, you were always, I know you loved journalism at first, correct?
Yeah, that's right. But I found that.
But what brought you to social work?
Well, you know what? When I was doing the journalism and writing, I did enjoy it and I still do. But after a little while, the jobs just weren't there anymore. And so I started to look at other careers. And then I thought maybe I could do something that's geared to my personality and the way I love to work with and talk to people. And then that led me to giving like an introductory counseling course to try and seeing, okay, let me try this. And I found I really got into it. I loved it. I loved the studies and the whole focus, which was solely on helping. And then talking to my teachers, one of them said, why don't you pursue the social service worker program? And I thought, yeah, that is a great idea. And so I'm doing it now and still love it. So for me, it just so happened I gear towards the helping careers, which I know is typical for female, they do tend to gravitate towards those kinds of jobs, but I do love it. And
that's where this gender argument for the three of us can agree, I think gets a little ridiculous, because we're not considering what a woman might be more geared toward.
Or for life, me, right?
Or life. Yeah, so, and that's the thing, and I mean, why men choose engineering occupations? Why women choose nursing? Why doctors tend to be male and not female?
But more men. I want to say this about the reference to Meet the Parents and Ben Stiller's character being a male nurse. You could get more men into nursing, which I have noticed over the last, we're in 2022, last 6 to 7 years, there's ways to sell it. I think to get more men into nursing, you could sell it as, for a male, this job, if you were to pick this up, you will always be employed. You will never have to worry about a mass layoff. You could potentially enter into the SEIU, which is a union. You have some level of safety with that because that's an advocate for you. There's benefits. Your job will never be replaced fully by a machine. It's taking care of somebody.
Yeah, excellent points. Yes, yes, and I want to add to that.
That's how you would get a man, and there's nothing, and honestly, just an FYI, to anyone, especially back in the 90s, to anyone who thought it was a bad occupation for men, it's not a bad occupation.
No. And it goes same thing with women. Like, how do you sell tech to women? And
I would wonder how you sell tech to women too.
One of the ways you can do it is say, do you like to problem solve? And women love to solve problems. They love to be creative. They're typically creative, and that's how you can get them in, because once they realize I can use a keyboard to solve problems and to take on those challenges, women love that.
And what do you think, Justin, to add to what you're saying, right? That maybe you can also say, it would also give you time when you can work remotely, when you work from home.
You work from home. You studying for it. All the time I see advertisements like, oh, you can earn a degree or postdoc degree, master's, second master's, or whatever from home. You can earn a micro credential from home on your own time. You don't have to sideline your family or your job or anything else. You can do it wherever, however you want.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's a good side hustle. You can create something for yourself.
There was one more thing I just wanted to add to our discussion today. There was one more thing I just wanted to add to our discussion today.
Mhm.
Let's see what the two of you think about this, because I was talking to a friend about this earlier in the week. For autism, they suggested, especially for a male of my ability, that, and it was on the internet, I had just Googled it during the week and this came up. And what was it? I'm looking at it right now. The mental health field, supposedly for an autistic male, isn't necessarily a bad idea.
Hmm.
I'm still drawn to programming and, being an analyst, but when I saw that there's what's called a BCBA, a broad certified behavior analyst, with what I'm trying to learn now within the medical field, it might be a consideration.
How long is it, that one?
Let me see how long that program would be.
It's good if it's not too long.
Not too long, yeah.
Yeah.
Like a short
Yeah,
term.
but see, here's the difference with me right now.
Mhm.
I can't obviously drop out and pursue something full time. I would have to do it in conjunction with working.
Okay, yeah.
Part-time or online?
Online, part-time.
I find this more convenient, like for full-time workers.
Yep.
Mm.
That's why I switched to the university
But
I
that
was
was
going
being
to.
suggested within the health and mental work field, and it was something that my mother mentioned to me, which is, and even a friend of mine who works for the government, health field right now is the place to be.
Stable.
Yep.
Which is important to a lot of people, especially
It's very
families,
important.
mortgage. Yeah.
Well, especially with where everybody's economy which is where everyone's global economy is. So anyway, we're going to end today, and I'm going to say, I hope everybody learned something with our special guest, and she's going to be back with us next week for a different gender topic, but it's going to be another gender-related topic.
Ooh.
Actually, Ben, can I just add one more point about the nursing? When
Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. When I did my essay on, I picked 4 occupations. So education, health, office, and I think there was one more, either 3 or 4. But comparing men and women and those occupations, interestingly enough, I asked a question in the class. How many of you are familiar with male nurses? Have you encountered a male nurse? And most said, yeah, they have encountered. So it is rising, men in nursing.
It's rising now because I believe within the next 5 to 20 years, with the addition of AI coming in, because this was predicted in movies, I don't think there's going to be as many options open to men and women, in other industries as there would be within the mental health field, as well as the healthcare industry itself.
Yeah, it's a huge one, mental health right now. Even in social work, mental health is like a very big topic, a lot of focus.
And yes, which is why we were glad to have you for this today. So tune in next week when we're going to discuss gender bias, which is kind of a patch off of what we're discussing today, which was the gender pay gap. I hope you guys all learned something, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.